My paper looked at the opportunities and challenges in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, but mostly the Southern Ocean. My area of expertise is oceans governance, but to look at the Southern Ocean, unlike other areas of ocean, you do need to actually take into account Antarctic region and the Antarctic Treaty system and the other regimes that are applicable in that jurisdictional area. So, for example, the Law of the Sea Convention, even though it is not part of the Antarctic Treaty system, it does actually influence the activities and the maritime boundaries that can be claimed in the Southern Ocean. I identified three main challenges for the Southern Ocean for the future, and the first one was a governance issue. Governance is going to be problematic because of the Article 4 of the Antarctic Treaty, which designates claims, or it doesn't freeze claims, but it does ensure that it's an agreement to disagree between claimant states. So the claimant states, such as Australia, recognise their Antarctic territory, but it doesn't mean that other states in the Antarctic region recognise those claims. So the US, for example, sees the Antarctic region as a commons, global commons for everyone. And by identifying our Antarctic region, we also have an exclusive economic zone in the Southern Ocean, and Australia has also made claims for an extended continental shelf, which raised some political issues amongst different claimant states. My second challenge for the Antarctic and Southern Ocean region is resource management and resource extraction. So my paper looks at the example of illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing as an example of looking at the fisheries and how international cooperation has actually reduced the amount of illegal fishing in the area. And so CAMLA, the Commission for the Conservation for Antarctic Marine Living Resources, has worked together with its member states to reduce illegal fishing in the Southern Ocean, and also Australia and France, who have got a bilateral agreement over their own exclusive economic zones in the Southern Ocean, have also worked together to try to stop illegal fishing from progressing. So while it's not completely eliminated in the Southern Ocean, it's significantly reduced. And there are some issues with the way the monitoring happens through the CAMLA process. However, it has been reasonably successful, and it is an example of good international cooperation. And my third challenge is looking at marine protection and protected areas in the Southern Ocean. So my paper examines how these marine protected areas came about, but also some of the issues with trying to designate these marine protected areas because of politics. So, for example, the latest discussions over the East Antarctic Marine Protected Area, for 8 consecutive years there has been no decision on this because no consensus has been reached. And while a lot of people argue that it's the actual process of consensus decision-making that is the problem, my argument is that it's actually the politics involved, and often it's the politics of the countries that do not want to have an MPA that come into the fore. And it may be about the fishing, about the resources, or it may have something to do with the politics between countries elsewhere. And so all of that comes into play when it comes to making decisions around marine protected areas. And also we have to think about the human impact on the Antarctic region. So tourism is going to be a big issue into the future, even though it is self-regulated. We are getting more and more tourists in the Antarctic, around 50,000 a year, and this continues to grow each year. So that there is a lot to consider with regards to human impact. Then when it comes to the opportunities and challenges, my paper identifies some new challenges that perhaps we haven't yet had a chance to think about. The first one is working towards 2048, when the Madrid Protocol can be reviewed. It doesn't mean the Madrid Protocol stops existing at all. It means it's just going to be reviewed. How it's reviewed and what issues come up will be a challenge. So I think this gives us an opportunity to work towards that date and try to come up with some innovative solutions and negotiate around different ideas that can help marine protection. The other issue that is close to my heart is marine plastic pollution. And in the latest Antarctic Consultative Treaty meeting, the treaty parties agreed on Resolution 5, and this talks about marine plastic pollution in the Southern Ocean and Antarctica and what measures need to be taken. And it's well understood that the plastic comes from elsewhere. It's not actually based from the Antarctic continent, and therefore how do you stop a problem that is being influenced by other areas and impacting the Antarctic region. So I think this is a challenge for the future that everyone needs to start to think about, because it is a global issue and will need global solutions. And I also think we've got this opportunity to be innovative in the Antarctic region because of the cooperation and peaceful approaches that are taken that don't happen anywhere else in the world. And I think that if we continue our peaceful stance and the claimant states continue to negotiate over issues with that region, we'll continue to have a place that is worthy of thinking about for scientific purposes and for everybody's enjoyment. I think that the ones that I've covered in the paper, I think the first one is the sovereignty issue, the recognising claims that this may change. We're looking at very powerful countries that are involved and in Antarctic activities and in the Southern Ocean. So while all countries are happy to go with the status quo and accept Article 4, I think things will progress quite fine. But if any country decides that it will change its mind about Antarctica being a demilitarised zone, not recognising some claimant states' claims, we may come into some future troubles. So that's one of them. But I guess the others, again, are marine protection, and also climate change is a very important issue that we need to consider, because we're seeing the effects of climate change in the polar regions more so than anywhere else in the world. Sometimes it's not as clear because of our cultural differences as to why some decisions are being made. But I think if different countries acknowledge that, and they have been doing that, but I think the lesson to be learned is sometimes the reasons why states do what they do can be a little bit deeper, where it seems that why is a particular country not wanting to protect an area of Antarctica. It may not be that they don't want to protect it, but they may have other reasons as to why they don't like a particular plan that's being suggested. I think we've got some interesting differences between the Arctic and the Antarctic. The demilitarisation of Antarctica gives us a real insight into what can happen when there is a scientific purpose, whereas in the Arctic we're seeing military involvement, more politics, and I think that can also show the Antarctic parties where we don't want to go, I guess. So we've got lessons from each region to learn. The Arctic also gives them some really interesting lessons about marine borders and claims over the marine space, which is less so seen down in the Southern Ocean. So the Arctic is showing us that these different borders can be quite problematic, and especially when the ice starts melting because of climate change and passages are being open, raises all sorts of issues of security and sovereignty as well. So I think we've got lessons that can be learned in both that can contribute to perhaps ways forward by learning from each other.